fun and informative podcast all about training working dogs? Look no further than the LWDG Pod Dog. This weekly show is hosted by me, Jo Perrott, founder of the Ladies Working Dog Group, and I chat to experienced trainers and experts in the field who will give you helpful tips and advice. Whether you're just getting started or you've been working with dogs for years, this podcast will have something for you. So pull up a chair, pour yourself a cup of coffee, and tune in to LWDG Pod Dog. Let us help you build a better bond with your best friend. Welcome to another episode of LWDG Pod Dog. I'm joined this evening by the amazing group experts, Em Stevens and Abbie Reid. Tonight we are going to be talking about Littermate Syndrome. So ladies, if I start with you, Em, what is Littermate Syndrome?
So it's been given this kind of title. It's basically where you have two dogs of a very, very similar age in the same household. And you, as they grow up and they develop, you can, if you don't manage it and you're not careful with your training, you can get issues from overexcitement all the way through to quite severe dog-dog aggression between each other, fights, really, really harming each other and having to keep them completely separate. So it can be quite a serious thing. It can just be that they're constantly play fighting and it's just annoying, or it can be as severe as aggression. And you also get things like separation anxiety from each other and a lack of a bond between owner and dog because they're so bonded to each other. So it can be quite a serious thing, which is why I wanted to discuss it today.
So it's a little bit like, I'm sure other ladies or other people listening to this will relate. I bred the two dogs I have now, and I couldn't decide, well, me and my dad couldn't decide which one each to keep out the litter. We kept them separately, but they were together. So even from the beginning, they've been around each other. And now definitely, with them living in the house and living closer together, I see them not play off each other, but they're very much interested in each other's lives, sometimes a little bit more than mine. Not so much now they're a little bit older, but yeah, they definitely do have that bond. But a lot of people do that, don't they? They think, oh, I want to have one, I'll have two, or I'll keep two, or I'll buy two. They'll be friends with each other. But a lot of people think that's not a good idea too.
I think it's a great idea for dogs are pack animals, so they like to have company. But I think the biggest thing is to know, just to have this in the back of your mind and be aware of it. Littermates or two dogs of a very similar age can be absolutely fantastic to have and really, really come on really nicely. But it's just to have this in the back of your mind so that you prevent any issues happening and make sure that they grow up as two individuals that live in the same house rather than two of the same and one suppressing the other and things like that. So that's just something to be aware of when you decide to have two dogs.
I've got three sets of littermates, age range from 10 all the way down to 1. So I've got brothers and sisters, 3 sets of them. I just say they're all totally different characters, you know, and they're like chalk and cheese. So if you're going to have two littermates or 3 littermates, you need to realize that they are different dogs, and you do need to build a bond, an individual bond with each of those dogs.
So is it a case then, does Littermate syndrome, as we hear about it, only affect related littermates?
No. So this is where people kind of get unstuck. They kind of go, all right, well, I'll avoid Littermate syndrome because I'll go and get one pup, and then 6 weeks, 7 weeks later, I'll go and get another pup from a different breeder. And even if they're a different breed, slightly different ages, we're talking around sort of between 8 to 12 weeks apart from each other, probably you'd still get the same kind of issues, but it can go up to kind of 6 months apart. So if you got a pup and then 6 months later got another dog, that pup's not fully trained and developed in its own body for you to go, right, you're a fully developed dog, I'll go and get another puppy. So it's all about their development, but you can get Littermate syndrome in dogs that aren't related to each other, which a lot of people aren't aware of because it's called Littermate syndrome. So you'd expect it in only dogs that are genetically related to each other, and that's not necessarily the case.
So I think what you're sort of saying there is, like, if you look at somebody who's got a large amount of dogs, older dogs have had time to become themselves in their own right, become quite independent in their own thinking. Where you have these dogs which are closer to age, they tend to bounce off one another.
They tend to bounce off each other rather than bounce off you. So what Emma was saying before, actually, they don't have to come from the same litter to have Littermate syndrome. So I've done this recently where I've actually got littermates, so brother and sister. 8 weeks later, I bought another pup. So only 2 months later, there's another pup. So there's 3 youngsters in my house. So actually, I can totally understand where Emma's coming from. The fact they do tend to look to each other for fun while they're out and about, which is fine when they're young. Okay, but once they start getting their feet under the table or whatever that phrase is, that's the time you need to go, actually, you guys need to spend less time together and more time with me on your own.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, don't get me wrong, pups brought up together can be absolutely fantastic. They do a lot of the kind of socialization, puppy play bit that you need them to do without actually you needing to do any effort as such. So you can almost use another puppy as a simulation, basically, of everything that you need. They learn their play biting. They learn a lot of behaviors about how to play and when to stop playing. But at the same time, you have to remember, actually, you need to treat these 2 dogs as complete individuals. As Abbie said, they're completely different dogs. They've got completely different personalities. And if you've got one that's slightly more of a bully than the other one, or one that's slightly more interested in things, and then you've got one that's a bit more reserved, those personalities need to be worked on differently. You need to be able to calm the boisterous, confident one down and not let it bully its sister or brother. And also you need to bring on the other one's confidence without it relying on its littermate, who's the confident one all the time. So they do need to be, and you need to be very aware of the dog's personalities that you're working with. And like Abbie said, at some point, you also need those dogs to look to you for that confidence and that trust and that relationship rather than each other.
You'll find that actually when you've got them together with you, they act very differently when they're on their own with you. That's what I found. It's like, oh, actually you're quite sweet when you're with me on your own, but when you're with your little mate, actually you're a little devil. So you do need to separate them and train them separately.
And I think that can be quite frustrating, like you said. If you're a novice handler and you've got 2, it is really hard to remember that you may need to handle both of them entirely differently, and that they will progress in different areas at different speeds. And you can't have that sort of mindset, can you, of, well, your brother can do it, so why can't you? It just doesn't work like that, does it?
No, and I think as well, you hit the nail on the head there, Jo, that actually you not only need to handle them differently when they're together and be a different handler to the 2 of them, you need to be nice with one and slightly harder and more strict with the other one and things like that. But equally then when they're separate, you might actually find that the one that's actually harder to control and a bit more kind of rogue is actually really, really sticky and glued to you when it's on its own. So again, you'd have to change your handling style when it's on its own compared to when it's with its littermate.
So what are the sort of signs of Littermate Syndrome? Because when you say Littermate Syndrome, it can sound almost like understandably alarmed, but really, really serious to the point that we need to potentially, if we knew, quite freak out about it. But what are the signs of it?
So it sounds like it's a bit of a disease when you call it Littermate Syndrome, doesn't it? And it's not that at all. But basically, the signs can vary from what Abbie touched on earlier, where you take them out and they're so engrossed in each other that they couldn't care less if you were there or not. You could go wait in the car and they could go and exercise themselves. It could go up to kind of what we would call jealousy. Obviously, dogs can't feel jealousy. It's more like guarding and things like that. So they could guard you, they could guard each other, they can guard things from each other. It could be as severe as starting to fight over things and get quite severe fights from them. Or it could be kind of the more emotional side of things, that actually they can't be separated from each other. And you're finding it really difficult. If you take one out, the other one's very, very stressed. And if they're together, they're absolutely fine and things like that. And you may find that one is more stressed than the other. So there's a few signs to look out for. But the biggest thing is that either you're finding them very aggressive and boisterous when they're together, or they're very, very stressed and separation anxiety when they're split up from each other.
Obviously, a lot of people who have Littermate Syndrome at the moment, they are potentially sort of concerned and want to know how they can sort of solve that. But before we go thinking about that, how do we prevent it in the first place?
So for me, having littermates, you have to be really organised and take in the individual needs of each dog. So you have to set a training program for each dog individually, from the 2. And you have to make time to take each dog out individually. spend time each day with them on their own. Okay, they can play about in the garden perhaps for a little while, but actually every day put one away, keep one out. Okay, and that's not just to train it, but just to mooch about the house with you, just to, find out his little character when he's not actually working. And then put that one away, get the other one out. So they have like free time to be themselves without the other dog, and then also you have to take them out the house individually and practice your heel work, sit stays, recall, puppy manners when they're on their own. And then equally, you have to teach them how to behave as a pair, because you do have a pair of dogs. So you've got to teach them individually and teach them how you want them to be when they are together.
And that bit can be really hard. Like I can say from absolute experience, my two separate work really, really well. My difficulties both of you know from dog and duck, my problems are always around when I bring them back together. The minute I bring them back together, they forget they're meant to listen to me. They will literally every single time take the cue off the other one. They're like, glance, what are we doing here? They are getting better over time, but I've also found as well, since Buddy's been neutered, Emma's become since Buddy's been neutered, Ella, I can't say my dog's name. Since neutered, Elsa has become quite dominant of him. So I think as well, everything that you do with littermates, they tend to, one thing will upset or affect the other.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just need so much organisation and a balance of everything. You've got to think this dog's got to grow up as if it went to another home without another dog there, but it's also got to be okay with that dog that it's going to live with as well. So you've got this constant balance. It would be very similar to if you had another older dog, but it's obviously you've got two of a very similar age at the same time. So you need to make sure, like Abbie said, they're going out separately, they're going out together, they're in the house on their own together and together. You're spending equal time with each of them. They can settle and sleep together, but equally they're quite happy and comfortable to sleep without the other one there as well. And you've got to make sure that they're socialized, so they're taken out to places that you need them to be exposed to together and separately, so that you know that they're kind of bomb-proof with each other and without each other from puppy, extending all the way through to their adolescence and into there. So you need to keep this up. You can't just do it and go, right, they're 6 months old now, they'll be fine, I can just sort of take them everywhere together. It needs to continue all the way through their adolescence, because they'll both possibly have fear periods at different times. They'll both mature at different times, especially if you've got different sexes. You'll have one that comes into season, one that goes through its testosterone bit. You'll have one that so you'll have different stages, even though they're the same age, they will go through different life stages at different points, and you need to cater for that together and separately.
And I suppose you've also got the other side where that maybe people don't think about when they buy them together and they've always been together, is at some point one of them is going to pass before the other and leave the other on its own. And if it's not trained to be independent or be able to cope without the other one, that can be extremely difficult for dogs, can't it?
Yeah, but even before that point, you'd still may need to separate them. If you've got different sexes, one might need spaying, or you might have one having its season while you've got an entire male. One of them might get injured for whatever reason and be in crate rest. At some point, they may need to be split. And that's why if you're doing it regularly from day dot, it's a very common thing for it to happen, and they don't get stressed by that. So you're preparing them for it.
Yeah, and by splitting, I think what sort of people need to think about is not just like training them separately by taking them in the car, and then leaving one in the car and training it. You actually have to take one at a time. So leave one at home, leave it on its own at home, take the other dog away, train it or go for a walk, whatever you may be doing, and then bring that dog back into the fold. So it's not just a case of training them separately. You have to actually literally separate them.
Okay, so we've gone through what we can do to prevent Littermate syndrome, but I'm sure there's people out there like me thinking I can relate to everything you've just said. So if you think you have Littermate syndrome, what are the steps towards fixing it? Separating dogs that have already got it now, that's going to be quite traumatic in some ways to start for them. What can we do?
I think firstly, it would depend on this kind of spectrum of the syndrome that we're talking about. So you could have them just that they constantly can't settle with each other, or they don't like being split from each other, all the way up to quite severe aggression. And obviously, if you're getting that, you need to see a behaviourist. That's not something that we can advise in a podcast. That would need kind of medical intervention and behaviourist intervention. But if we're talking about dogs that rely on each other too much and not necessarily their handlers, and don't like being separated from each other, or are very over boisterous and you can't do training because they just want to play fight all the time, and it's never got to the extreme of being nasty, it's just constant rough and tumble. The things you can do are definitely in the house. You can start mixing it up with one in a crate and one, even if it's in the same room to start with, one in a crate, one mooching around, swap them over, little things like that, building into it. If you're going out for training, you can do the thing that Abbie said, obviously leave one at home, but if that isn't possible, you can start by taking them both out, leaving one in the car in sight, doing a little bit of training, even if it's just walking around the car, and put them back in, swap them over, and then build on leaving them at home. So you just basically break it down into very easily sizable chunks of minimal stress, but starting to split them, and then build on that, kind of as you would do separation anxiety. But it's just separation anxiety from each other rather than from the human. If you've got the other side of it and it's over boisterous, constant play, and actually you can't get any training done with the two of them together, that sort of thing can be a management of, again, it depending on their steadiness level. Can you sit one up while you're training the other and it doesn't move? If you can't do that, maybe ask somebody to help you and hold it while you do it, or one on the lead and one is mooching to start with, and then swap them over and things like that. So they're just a couple of sort of little tips that you can do. But again, contact a trainer as well, and help, and get them to help you do some dual handling of both of the dogs, and manage and learn how to manage your day in your situation.
Yeah, because we have a masterclass on dual handling, because that in itself, with or without Littermate Syndrome, dual handling can be a difficult enough challenge, but when you add this to the mix, it just takes it up that level again. So Abbie, you spoke about the fact that you've got 3 sets of them. Is this something that, like, you've been managing this or preventing this from happening for quite a while?
Yeah, it's just, as I said earlier on, the easiest way is you have to treat them as individual dogs. You have to take them out separately, you have to train them separately, walk them separately, build a bond separately, feed them separately, and when you think, oh, actually, do you know what, this little puppy is actually working for me now, then you can perhaps put them together for a while, and as Emma said, do some brace training, and then actually, oh no, they're looking at each other a little bit too often. Okay, let's go back to individual stuff. And then depending on the character of the dog, eventually you can have them together as part of your pack, and it's happy days then. But you need to put a lot of work in at the beginning. It's not too easy to take them out together for time reasons and say, oh, okay, just deal with it. But actually, you'll regret it in the future.
I know my Littermates, the minute they were ready to go, so they spent some time in doing the house stuff that I would normally do. And again, that was separated. And then when we put them into the kennels, we put them with different older dogs to start with, so that they got some manners from obviously some older dogs, but equally they weren't with each other. They were on 2 separate areas of the kennels as well. And now if you put them together, but that's the thing as well, if you completely separate them and then put 2, because ours are males as well, you put 2 of the same age group back together that have developed completely separately, you can then cause issues as well. So we were very mindful of making sure that they did spend time together, so that they didn't develop aggression from a different point of view, but didn't spend too much time together, because then and develop aggression towards each other from that point of view. So it's just a constant mix of it. And we mix our dogs, the ones that do get on. We've got a couple of terriers that don't get on with anything. But we mix our dogs around in the kennels an awful lot anyway, so that they don't form massive bonds to each other. I like them to all like each other, but I don't want to go to a kennel and get 2 dogs out that love each other more than they love me. So that it's a really, really fine balance of making sure that they can all kind of be mooched around, and I'm still the number one love of their life.
And we talked for the last sort of 20 minutes about like what we need to be cautious of, But to end this podcast, there's quite a lot of joy of having two out of the same litter as well, isn't there? You know, so it's not a case of, oh, don't ever do it. It's just be very mindful of these things. When you have got two from the same litter, as much frustration as my two bring me, because I bred them myself and they're mine and I'm watching them grow, I do actually like that they're the same age.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, Jo. Actually, it's really makes you really proud when you walk out with two dogs that you've trained that are litter mates. Like, I've got all brothers and sisters, so and actually you go on a shoot with them and like you get compliments that actually they're brother and sister, you know, and it is really nice, but it is a lot of work to get there. You know, just be mindful of that.
My litter mates, I just think they're just fantastic. They're so different and so similar at the same time that they're just a joy to work together or separately. So it is possible, you can do it, but you've just got to have this in the back of your mind all the time, that you've taken on two dogs. You haven't taken on two dogs that you can train as one dog. You've taken on two dogs that need training as two dogs.
Like, I don't know if you've seen yours, and probably I'm probably humanizing a little much, but I almost find, even when Dad had all his dogs there, watching litter mates together, it's like they always almost talk to each other, like not talk to each other, but you see them look at each other and they're just completely on the same wavelength. So I think there is that bit that sort of makes, for me, it is worth the stress. And believe me, it is stress. It's not for the faint-hearted, I don't think, in any way. If you're faint-hearted at all, at least leave a few years between the two dogs you buy. But yeah, when you do have it, or if you end up with it, you can get through it.
You could definitely get through it. And as I said, it is a really amazing feeling when you do get through it. But there will be, as in all aspects of dog training, highs and lows along the way.
Thank you, ladies, for another amazing podcast. I really do appreciate, and I'm sure our listeners appreciate, the time and effort you put into putting these podcasts together and the information that you impart about gun dogs and about training. Thank you all for listening at home or walking your dog. We do hope you're enjoying the LWDG Pod Dog as much as we are enjoying recording for you. And we hope to speak to all of you next week. Thank you for listening to LWDG Pod Dog with me, Jo Perrott. Now, we all know training a dog takes time, energy and patience, but our lives can be really, really busy. Don't worry, the LWDG has got you covered. Join us for our free planning workshop, where we'll show you how to use short 10-minute training sessions each day to fast forward your dog's education. Our experts have years of experience in training dogs and will help you get started on the right foot. Register now and start making progress with your furry friend today. Go to our Facebook page, the Ladies Working Dog Group, and click on the pinned post, or visit www.thelwdg.com.